Frenzon spread through X781's body as the hypodermic needle speared into his flesh. His blurry eyesight refocused, and all the fatigue and pain of the last few hours dropped from his body like a heavy weight. In front of him was the throne room of the target. His body was slicked with blood and viscera from the many inconveniences in his way. The last one, a space marine warped by the ruinous powers, was split from shoulder to pelvis on the floor, the last of his life's blood pumping out over the thick carpet. The training of the Eversaw Clade, more than a match for a mere marine. X781 started towards the door, picking up speed as he ran. Genetic enhancements and combat drugs allowing him to reach speeds an unenhanced human could only dream about. Just as he reached the door, he leapt, hitting it like a cannonball. The large wooden door smashed under his weight and speed, splintering into sections. Fury now dumped into his system as another needle punctured his skin. Time dilated as the drug heightened his already enhanced senses. The long throne room was lit by giant plastic windows, almost cathedral-like in its setting. Chandeliers hung from the roof, and a deep red carpet ran along the floor, up to an obsidian dais on which sat a large throne. His heads-up display identified all potential targets in the room. The highest threat was 5 Chaos Space Marines, all near the dais, their dark red armour almost indestructible. 3 held bolt guns in their massive hands. One of the others carried a knife in his right hand, a sickly green smoke rising from it, and a tome of some description in his left. The final Marine had a blade that glinted in a multicoloured hue in the sunlight. His other hand held a plasma pistol of archaic design. Its plasma coils wept a sickly blue light into the room. On the dais itself stood his target. The unenhanced human's head had bony protrusions pushing through his skin, the taint of chaos clear in his body. His armour was similar, but smaller to the Marines guarding him. The bolters roared, their muzzles strobing light as their rounds travelled downrange. X781 was still falling through the door. All of these observations made in the seconds it was taking from the breach to his feet touching the ground. He leapt to the left, his right arm raising his executioner pistol and firing 2 bolts at the nearest of the bolter-armed Marines, before switching to the toxin needle ammo and firing the small dart-like projectile. The first bolt round smashed into the Marine's head, knocking it backwards as the round detonated. The second round deflected off of the snout of the Marine's breathing unit, detonating harmlessly but tilting the Marine's head back further. Then the dart of the needle pistol hit home, sliding through the rubber of the armour's neck seal, a small puff of blood dissipating from the impact, and the Marine dropped as if poleaxed. Partway through X781's dive to the left, bolts from the fusillade started chewing up the carpet and the floor where he had landed, the Marine's superior reaction still not fast enough to hit one of the most lethal killing machines the Imperium has ever made. As he landed, X781 rolled and then started towards the dais. The closest Marine was down, the neurotoxin flowing through its body. X781 brought the executional pistol up and in line with another Marine, and fired 2 darts from the needle pistol. The first dart chipped the paint off the brow of the Marine's helmet, but the second punched through the helmet lens in another puff of blood. The Marine fell backwards, his bolter coughing rounds into the ceiling as his trigger finger spasmed. In the last couple of seconds, X781 had dispatched 2 Marines, and had covered half of the throne room's distance. Darting from side to side to throw off their aim, he had also made it so far unscathed. However, his heightened senses detected a flicker of light coming from the tome-wielding Marine's hand as the Marine brought the blade across his own wrist, crimson blood arcing into the air. Corpuscent lightning leapt from the Marine's wound and stuck X781 fully, blasting him into the nearest wall. The smell of burning flesh and tainted ozone filled the room as pain seared through X781's body. The next combat drug's needle slipped beneath his flesh, and the terminus drug burned away the pain. X781 bounded from the ground, making back the ground he had lost in less than a second. The last Bolter Marine brought their weapon around onto X781. His executioner pistol left behind in the ruin of the wall, X781 reached for his belt, plucking a tube from it. He threw the weapon into the last Bolter Marine. As the tube left his hand, pain speared up his arm as a bolt finally made contact with it. The round penetrated his hand, and as it made its way down his arm, the mass reactive head detonated. Agony burst through X781's being as his right arm, all the way to the shoulder, disintegrated in a shower of bone shards and gore. The Marine did not fare any better. As the melter charge slapped into his armour, it detonated. Heat greater than the sun evaporated the top 2/3 of the Marine, and then the air popped as air rushed back into the area that the explosion in the top of the Marine had previously occupied. 2 threats left, 1 target. X781's automated systems dumped another dose of fury and friendzone into his body, the discarded ampules making a chiming sound as they hit the floor. X781 ate up the last few strides to the tome-wielding Marine, while drawing his power sword with a flourish. He leapt as the Marine lifted its smoking blade to intercept the power weapon. The blue power field slapped away the ritual weapon with a squeal, and the tip of the blade pierced through the Marine's helm, melting through armour, skull and brains. The Marine fell, and X781 tumbled with the body, using the momentum of the fall to pull the blade up and through the remains of the Chaos Follower's helmet. Light, like the sun, ate up the body of the dead Marine, as the plasma pistol in the last Marine's hand was discharged. The round just missed X781 and turned the other Marine's remains into ash. Rising from his controlled tumble, X781 was within 3 feet of the final Marine. Bringing his power sword cutting down from left to right, X781 cut into the plasma pistol. A sickly blue plasma fire exploded out of the weapon and threw him back. Spinning in the air, X781 dropped the remains of his power sword, allowing him to use his left hand to handspring as it touched the ground. The force popped some of the tendons in his wrist, but it allowed him to only lose a few feet of distance. As he landed on his feet, he noticed the Marine was also rising, its left arm a ragged mess, and half the Marine's helmet had been melted onto its face. The smell of crisping meat had intensified. X781 launched himself at the Marine and felt fire coursed through his stomach as the fell demon weapon parted the flesh of his abdomen to slice deep through his body. The power of the blow and X781's leap pushed the blade through his body, and X781 reached with his left hand for the Marine's helm. The hyper-alloy claws parted the ceramite and bit into the Marine's flesh. Blood wept from the wounds as the inbuilt toxin injectors dumped a charge of neurotoxin into the Marine's body. The Marine fell at X781's feet. The final target was in front of him. 2 steps up the dais and 3 to the target. Less than a second for an Eversword to travel. Moving like lightning, sword still protruding from his body, X781 reached the target. The target had raised the las pistol, and stings from pinprick hits shocked X781's body. X781 jumped into a spin kick, his heel making contact with the target's skull. The crack and shock ran up his leg as he broke the target's neck. As the spin continued, a bolt round struck his leg, the explosion throwing him to the side and turning his leg to a pulpy mess. More ampules plinked off the floor as combat drugs were dumped almost non-stop into X781's body. As he made contact with the floor, the embedded sword tore itself from his torso with the force. As he rolled to a stop, he used his remaining arm to prop his torso up. Chaos Space Marines were storming the throne room. The final drug in X781's arsenal was injected into his body. Destroyer, the most potent of all combat drugs, metabolized the remains of the Eversword and detonated a blaze of bio-meltdown. The top of High Primus Ollis detonated as the Eversword breathed its last.
Message to Lieutenant Spain. Target destroyed. Asset lost. 5 assets left. Out.